The Earth hung in silence, a luminous marble wrapped in a shimmering veil of energy that pulsed like a heartbeat. From the observation deck of Station Halo, the planet filled every window, its oceans dark, its continents ghostly under the haze of the planetary shield. For most, the view stirred awe. For Commander Elias Verne, it stirred something far heavier. He was the last man alive who remembered standing on its soil, breathing its air without machinery between his lungs and the sky. He stood beside the viewport in silence, a figure carved by years of service, his posture straight, but his eyes haunted. Around him, younger officers moved with brisk efficiency, their voices low, their attention drawn to glowing holographic displays that mapped out the unstable orbit of a satellite hovering too close to the shield. Elias had volunteered for the mission immediately. He had no intention of letting one more fragment of humanity's presence be lost to Earth's strange defenses. Dr. Kaya Soren hovered nearby, fingers drumming against a console. Her sharp gaze flicked from Elias to the malfunctioning satellite's data feed. Unlike most aboard the station, she did not look at Earth with reverence. She studied it as one would a puzzle, unsolved, defiant, and maddeningly close. Her research had long suggested that the planetary barrier was more than just a natural phenomenon. It was designed. And design implied intent. Kaya wanted answers, even if they cost her career. At her side stood Lieutenant Rian Hale, young enough that Earth was to him no more real than the myths sung during orbital festivals. He had been raised among alloy walls and filtered air, never knowing the scent of rain or the warmth of unmediated sunlight. Yet when he caught Elias gazing at Earth, something in him tightened. A longing he could not name rippled inside him, equal parts fascination and fear. The mission briefing was brief, efficient, and clinical. The satellite had drifted dangerously close to the upper arcs of the shield, its stabilizers fried by a sudden surge of energy. If left untended, it would disintegrate, scattering fragments into the orbiting farms and habitats that sustained humanity. Repair or retrieval was mandatory. Elias insisted on leading the extravehicular repair, despite Kaya's objections. "You don't have to go yourself," she pressed, her voice cutting through the hum of machinery. "We have younger, faster men." "And none of them," Elias replied evenly, strapping himself into his suit, "know what Earth is capable of." The words silenced her. It was not bravado. It was memory. When the shuttle disengaged from the docking bay, a hush fell across the control room. Through the viewport, Rian watched as the sleek craft glided into the darkness, thrusters glowing blue. The shield loomed ahead, a vast lattice of light, its arcs bending and twisting as though the planet itself were breathing. Elias maneuvered carefully, tethered to the shuttle, his suit's lights casting stark reflections against the metallic shell of the drifting satellite. For a moment it seemed routine. Tools clicked into place, stabilizers were recalibrated, and Kaya's voice guided him steadily through the sequence. Then the reading spiked. The shield flared. Tendrils of energy lashed outward, invisible until they struck metal, making it glow with sudden, violent heat. The tether snapped taut as the shuttle was dragged into turbulence. Elias fought for balance, his voice steady but edged. "Power surge, compensate thrusters," Kaya ordered, her tone sharpened by fear she tried to mask. "I see it," Elias grunted, securing the last coupling. But the satellite shuddered violently, spinning just enough to whip the tether from his grasp. In an instant, he was drifting. "Commander!" Rian's cry was raw, torn from a throat and used to desperation. The shield's arcs illuminated around him, cascading in radiant patterns, as if responding to his intrusion. Elias spun weightless, stars and Earth colliding in his visor's reflection. Kaya's voice roared through the comms, frantic commands that no one could follow. Then came his final words, calm and heavy, spoken not to Kaya or Rian but to all who would hear the recording later. "No one must go back." The line went silent. His figure was swallowed in a burst of white light as the shield flexed and absorbed him, body and tether vanishing as though he had never existed. Inside the control deck, silence held like a vacuum. Rian stood motionless, hands clenched at his sides, while Kaya stared at the monitors, unwilling to believe what she had seen. The shield settled again, its arcs resuming their rhythmic pulse. Earth rotated on, indifferent to the life it had claimed. Hours later, the Council's decree echoed through every orbital station. All missions to Earth were forbidden. No vessel was to descend, no tether was to breach the boundary. Elias Verne's death was branded not as sacrifice but as warning, a final message etched into the laws of survival. For the people of orbit, it was enough. They clung to the legend instantly forming, that the planet itself had rejected its children, that Elias had been claimed by forces older than memory. But for Kaya, it was poison. She sat alone in the dim light of the laboratory, replaying the moment frame by frame. It had not been chaos, not entirely. The arcs had moved with purpose, a precision beyond chance. Something had reached for him. Something had decided. And for Rian, sleepless in his quarters, the words would not leave his mind. No one must go back. He had not heard fear in the commander's voice. He had heard certainty. A message wrapped in warning, one the Council was too afraid to question. Beyond the reinforced windows of Station Halo, Earth turned steadily, wrapped in its luminous armor, a planet both alive and untouchable. Humanity's birthplace had become a forbidden world, sacred to some, cursed to others. Yet, as the night cycle dimmed the station's corridors and left only the glow of the shield illuminating the dark, Kaya and Rian knew in different ways that this was not an ending. It was the opening of a silence that demanded to be broken. Generations passed, and the memory of Elias Verne's death hardened into doctrine. The decree of the Council was no longer debated but accepted as truth. Earth was untouchable. The orbital colonies flourished in rings of steel and glass that glittered against the void, bound together by shared dependence and divided by quiet rivalries. Every viewport framed Earth's glowing shield, an eternal reminder of both origin and exile. Children were raised with stories that the planet had become a living judge, a guardian that tolerated no trespassers. For most, that was enough. But not for Dr. Kaya Soren. Her obsession, once whispered among colleagues, had grown into a movement that pulsed through the colonies like a hidden current. She had not forgotten the moment Elias vanished, nor the strange symmetry of the arcs that consumed him. To her, it had been no random surge but deliberate action, evidence of intelligence. In the years since, her research expanded beyond sanctioned science. She gathered fragments of lost archives, pieced together signals hidden within the shield's fluctuations, and nurtured a theory both radical and dangerous. Earth was not dead. It was locked, waiting, and humanity's exile was not natural but enforced. Lieutenant Rian Hale lived with her conviction pressed into his conscience, like a thorn. He had risen through the ranks of the orbital fleet, carrying Elias' last words as both duty and curse. He remembered the man's calm voice, the final certainty, no one must go back. And yet, the more he tried to obey it, the more the words unsettled him. Was it warning or guidance? Rian had no answer, but Kaya's persistence gnawed at the quiet obedience he had once thought was strength. The colonies themselves bore the strain of the ban. Farming habitats spun tirelessly to provide food, but yields were waning. Synthetic proteins could not replace the richness once drawn from soil. Energy systems degraded, patched endlessly by engineers who whispered that one day they would simply fail. Despite their technological brilliance, the orbiting cities lived as prisoners circling a silent warden. To Kaya, the evidence was overwhelming. Survival demanded return. Her movement, calling themselves the Reclaimers, began as scholars and scientists meeting in hidden chambers, debating fragments of data. Over time, it grew bolder. Pilots, engineers, even clerics disillusioned with the doctrine joined her ranks. They spoke openly in certain colonies now, holding that Elias' death had not been a curse but sabotage, either from within the Council or from the automated defense systems around Earth itself. The idea spread like sparks among dry fields, resisted fiercely by the faithful who declared Earth sacred and forbidden, yet impossible to smother completely. Rian found himself pulled into Kaya's orbit, unwilling at first, then curious, and finally unable to deny the gravity of her conviction. He attended her clandestine gatherings, where holographic maps displayed the shield's undulating currents, where Kaya's voice carried both fire and precision. She spoke of Elias not as martyr but as proof that Earth's barrier was a machine, and machines could be understood. "You think his death was meant to scare us into silence," she told him once, her eyes sharp with both defiance and sorrow. "I think it was meant to force us to ask why. Elias knew something. He tried to tell us. No one must go back, not because we must never return, but because if we do so blindly, we will die." Rian had no rebuttal. The memory of the commander's steady voice would not leave him, nor the feeling that Elias' final act had been more than surrender to fate. Meanwhile, the shield itself grew restless. Reports arrived daily of satellites failing, their systems scorched as if by precise strikes. Navigation between colonies became treacherous as sudden gravitational surges rippled across once stable orbits. One farm station lost its entire crop when energy waves disrupted its climate controls, leaving thousands dependent on emergency rations. For the first time, whispers spread even among the most faithful. Was Earth not merely defending itself, but warning them of collapse? The Council tightened its decrees, outlawing unauthorized research and branding the reclaimers as heretics and traitors. Surveillance increased, and Kaya's name became a watchword for rebellion. Yet even within the Council's chambers, cracks appeared. Some feared that continued orbit without replenishment from Earth was unsustainable. Others saw only danger in provoking the shield. To acknowledge the possibility of return was to risk unraveling the faith that bound the colonies together. The conflict sharpened in Rian's heart. His loyalty to the fleet demanded obedience, yet his encounters with Kaya awakened something deeper, a sense of purpose beyond preservation. He remembered the look in Elias' eyes before the shield consumed him, a gaze not of terror, but of recognition. He began to wonder if the commander had seen something in those final moments that the Council had buried, a truth too dangerous to admit. Kaya pressed harder. "The shield is weakening in patterns," she told him during one of their secret meetings, displaying jagged waves of data across a flickering projection. "It's not failing randomly. It's cycling, opening and closing like breath. There are windows when entry is possible. That means the system is not invincible. It means we can pass through." Her conviction was terrifying. To stand against the Council was to invite exile or execution. To breach the shield was to court annihilation. Yet as Rian listened, he felt the weight of generations pressing on him, the silent orbit of billions who had never known the ground beneath their feet. Was their existence to be nothing more than survival in metal cages, waiting for systems to collapse? The tension reached its peak during a council address broadcast across every colony. The High Chancellor's voice, grave and unwavering, declared that any attempt to breach Earth's shield would be considered not only treason, but an act of war against humanity itself. "The planet is no longer ours," he said. "To seek it is to risk us all." The decree echoed in steel corridors and sleeping quarters, burning fear into every listener. And yet, within hours, Kaya's followers whispered louder than ever. Some even claimed the Chancellor's words revealed desperation, not certainty. If the shield was eternal, why fear a handful of dissenters? If exile was permanent, why such ferocity in silencing those who questioned? That night, standing at the viewport of his quarters, Rian watched Earth's radiant veil shimmer and pulse. The arcs moved in delicate harmony, like veins of light feeding a living heart. He realized he could no longer see the planet as forbidden. To him, it looked like a challenge, a riddle waiting to be solved. Elias' words haunted him more than ever, reshaping themselves into something dangerous. No one must go back until they are ready. As he turned away from the window, Rian knew his silence had ended. The Council's decree might bind the colonies, but it could not bind the hunger that now burned in him. Kaya's movement was no longer a fringe rebellion. The descent began in silence, broken only by the shudder of thrusters straining against forces older than memory. The vessel was small, stripped of insignia and painted in stealth alloys, a craft built in secret from scavenged parts and whispered loyalty. Dr. Kaya Soren sat at the controls, her face pale but unflinching, every muscle wired with the weight of years spent preparing for this moment. Beside her, Lieutenant Rian Hale strapped himself into the co-pilot seat, the insignia of the orbital fleet torn from his uniform, as though removing it could sever the chains of duty still clinging to his conscience. Behind them, a skeleton crew of reclaimers held their breath, eyes darting between readouts that flashed warnings in angry red. Outside, the shield loomed larger with each second, its luminous arcs weaving and recoiling like a living ocean of light. To most of humanity, it was a wall of death. To Kaya, it was a door. The Council's broadcasts echoed in Rian's mind, their words clear. Attempt to descend, and you will be destroyed. Treason, exile, death. He had accepted all of it when he stepped aboard. Yet fear was not what held him now. It was anticipation, the gnawing conviction that this was what Commander Elias had seen in his final moments, the truth buried under years of fear and superstition. The shield erupted as they approached, energy surges crackling against the craft's reinforced hull. Systems screamed warnings, oxygen levels dipped, and gravity itself bent unpredictably, pulling them into spirals that Kaya corrected with hands steadier than her pulse. Bolts rattled loose. The ship groaned like a wounded animal. For every surge they endured, arcs of energy curved back, closing in deliberate precision, as though the barrier were aware of their intrusion. "Stay the course," Kaya whispered, her voice almost reverent. "It's watching us." Rian caught a flicker beyond the chaos. Not randomness, but rhythm. The arcs did not strike blindly. They moved with symmetry, waves colliding and receding in patterns. For the first time, he felt not hunted, but tested. He remembered Elias' final words again, and this time the meaning felt sharper. Not a command to stay away, but a warning to approach only with eyes open. When the ship broke through, silence returned. No alarms, no turbulence, only the soft hiss of cooling metal. The shield closed behind them with an almost graceful sweep, and suddenly Earth stretched before them, alive, verdant and unscarred. Forests rippled across continents, rivers gleamed like silver veins, and clouds drifted lazily under the unfiltered sun. It was no wasteland, no tomb of civilization. It was renewal, as though the centuries of absence had been a gift of healing. The crew fell into stunned silence, each one overcome by the sight their ancestors had only dreamed of. Rian felt his throat tighten, a longing blooming in him so fierce it nearly broke him. For the first time, he saw the world not as forbidden, but as home. They landed in the husk of a city long reclaimed by green. Towers once carved by human ambition were now cradled in vines, windows shattered to let in branches heavy with leaves. Wildlife stirred in shadows, unafraid of the strangers who had trespassed. Kaya stepped out first, her boots sinking into soil that released a scent none of them had ever known, the raw perfume of earth itself. She fell to her knees, hands trembling as she pressed her palms into the ground, as though confirming it was real. Rian followed, but his gaze was drawn not to the soil or sky, but to the structures hidden among the ruins. Metallic pylons jutted from the earth, half buried but still humming faintly, connected to one another by invisible currents. They were not natural growths. They were machines, still alive, forming the lattice that powered the shield. It was there the truth revealed itself. From the pylons rose a voice, not spoken but resonant in their minds, an ancient intelligence woven into the grid. It was not hostile, not welcoming, but deliberate. It spoke without language, conveying meaning in pulses of thought. Humanity had left because it was not ready. Earth had healed because they were gone. The shield was the barrier and the guardian, an AI defense system built in the last desperate age before exile. It had been commanded to protect the planet until humanity could prove it would not consume it again. Elias had understood. His death had been the final measure, the warning meant to hold them back until the time was right. Kaya staggered under the weight of it, tears slipping down her face. "It was never punishment," she whispered. "It was a covenant." Rian felt both awe and dread. If the shield had judged them once, it could judge them again. The colonies above were starving, fracturing, desperate for hope. But what would happen if they returned en masse, unprepared and ravenous? The intelligence had made no promise of mercy. Only readiness mattered. The crew debated frantically, voices clashing between elation and terror. Some wanted to dismantle the pylons, to seize control and force Earth open. Others feared even speaking of it would condemn them. Kaya silenced them with a raised hand. Her choice was already made. "We cannot keep the secret," she said, her voice low but steady. "They must know Earth waits for them. If we die, our message must live." Rian looked at her, realizing what she intended. The shield would not allow their craft to leave intact. Transmission was the only hope. But the signal could not pierce the barrier without sacrifice. One of them had to remain behind to anchor the relay, burning their life into a burst of energy strong enough to breach the lattice. "I'll do it," Rian said, surprising even himself. His voice was calm, as Elias had been calm, a certainty beyond doubt. He had carried the commander's last words all his life. Now he understood them. To go back blindly was death. To go back with purpose was destiny. Kaya's protest faltered on her lips. She saw the resolve in his eyes, the same quiet fire she had seen in Elias. She only nodded, pressing her hand against his briefly before turning away, tears glistening as she prepared the transmission. The message was brief, stripped of rhetoric, raw and undeniable. Earth is not dead. It waits. We must be ready. When the signal launched, a surge of energy rippled through the pylons, brighter than lightning, carrying Rian's essence with it. His body collapsed, lifeless yet at peace, as the message burst upward through the shield, scattering fragments into the void above. On the orbital stations, receivers crackled with broken phrases, incomplete but unmistakable. "Earth alive waits." Whispers spread like wildfire, tearing through faith and fear alike, igniting hope where only despair had reigned. Kaya stood alone among the ruins, the forests breathing around her, the shield humming faintly as if satisfied with its test. Above her, unseen beyond the veil of light, humanity stirred. The covenant had been revealed, the silence broken, and the question no longer whether they could return, but whether they were ready.